Hello, Andrew.
And hello to you, Samir. Proud to be here.
Where are you joining us from today? Which city in the UK?
The weather here is stunning. As I look to my right here, I look through panoramic windows and I've got a landscape around me of about 280 degrees of uninterrupted English countryside
Oh,
on a,
lovely.
on a sunny day.
Lovely. A great setting for our conversation that's going to happen.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so. At least we're starting with a smile on our face and a skip in our step.
Yeah. Uh, the typical way to start off my all my conversations is to look at what I asked you about what leadership is for you, and you mentioned leadership's true role is to create followership measurable in both business results and cultural impact. Before we start off, I want to just share with audience and also with yourself that the whole objective of us having this conversation is to help managers to become more better as leaders. And leadership, you said, is about having followership. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more before I dive in?
Yeah, I was almost afraid to give you the answer when you asked me this question beforehand. Because when you think about it, it's blooming obvious, right? You're not leading anything if you don't have followers.
Yeah.
You're living in a vacuum. And therefore, the prime requirement for leadership is to gather around you a group of people wherein the sum total is going to exceed the component parts. Otherwise, a leader with no followers, right, is less than the component parts. And there's nobody wise enough, clever enough, visionary enough to do anything on their own. And this is something that let's explore this in part as we go on. Therefore, this isn't a sophisticated business school answer to a very penetrating question. For
Yeah.
me, absolutely obvious. When you asked me, I didn't think, can I give him a smart answer to the question? It came from
Yeah.
here. It came
Yeah.
from here, and it came from a lifetime of experience. Let leaders be judged by the quality of the people who are following them.
But creating followers or someone choosing to follow us, is it really in our control? Because what is in our control is not saying, hey, you must follow me or you must follow me, right? So what is it that is truly in our control to be an effective leader, according to you?
Turn that around. We're not talking about leadership in a vacuum here. We're talking about leadership largely within a business context. Okay.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is you arrive on the scene, doesn't matter by what means, as a leader. What you then have to do is to create followership for the people in the organization around you. So I'm not talking about this in an abstract sense, I'm talking in a practical one. So you arrive as a CEO, your first objective is to gather within the business a sense of we're proud to have you as the leader. I'm talking from within the organization. Um, I like what I hear you say. I will therefore follow you. Otherwise, you have a completely dysfunctional business.
Hmm.
And you don't achieve that followership by operating on the tell principle. You start off by doing it on the listen principle.
Hmm.
Create followership by inclusion, by bringing people in, by sharing and enriching what it is that you as a leader stand for. Where are your values? Where's your energy? What are your objectives? What is the recognition amongst the leader that they're very good at some things, but nobody's very good at everything? Therefore, what resources do they need around them in order to achieve the commercial goals and the cultural goals that are in front of them?
Hmm. I know you're heavily into executive search. You've done a lot of interviews. You've recruited a lot of people at the very top levels. Um, I have many questions around this. My first question is, how do you spot potential? How do you identify in a brief interview that this guy could be a big leader who could serve a very large organization. How do you spot the difference between people who can lead massive teams and they might not have done it before, because somebody has to get there to that level through a journey, right? So how do you
I'm
spot potential?
smiling now because some of my proudest moments when I've done just this. When somebody has come into my room or into my awareness, and I've been with them for 5 minutes, and I thought, there's a je ne sais quoi here. There is something special. And how do you spot it? I don't think there's a simple way. I think one of my sources for success was that I had the talent to do what you just described. So if you ask Djokovic as an example, right, and what talent did he think he had to win 27 majors, he couldn't answer that question. And I therefore can't answer this question either. To some extent, for some of us, we're privileged to have that insight. Is there, however, a methodology? Yes. And it starts off with listening. So somebody that stepped into my office and immediately started telling me how good they were, I'd write them off. Somebody who didn't engage me eye to eye, somebody who hadn't done some research to work out what lay behind the invitation for me to be meeting them. You with me?
Yes.
All kinds of small illustrations of connectivity. So I had the privilege of operating largely at C-suite level for a very long time all over the world, right? I therefore knew and understood how C-suite individuals thought and behaved, and therefore I had a benchmark against which I was measuring people, and it would be summarized in very unbusiness school language. They get it.
So let me give a little bit more context to my question. Let us assume that someone who is listening to this is in talent acquisition, and someone who has recruited C-suite for $1 million companies, but never for $1 billion company.
Mhm.
So is it the same, or is there something else that they should be looking for when they are recruiting someone for $1 billion organization?
No, the monetary values around it would actually be a supplementary issue entirely. You'd be asking the question not whether they're talented enough, but can they scale? Can they go from $250 million to $1 billion? Is that scale now being expressed in geography? Is it being expressed in technology? And therefore, you'd be looking for something specific rather than something general. Your question started off with general. How, when somebody walks into your room, do you think, wow, this is it? And that's happened a few times in my life, which means numerically, not that often. But when it happens, you just know you're in the company of somebody who gets it, somebody who's got something very special. I was privileged to recruit for a FTSE number 10 company in the United Kingdom, somebody who only 5 years later became the youngest CEO in the FTSE 10. And the story behind that was I was commissioned to find somebody to head. This is a financial business. A very important part of their business going forward. To be specific, I was commissioned by the CEO, who I'd recruited beforehand, to find a strategy. And the mission was, I want somebody to head strategy, but in this organization, we don't like strategists who've not run stuff. So I want somebody who's run stuff, but is a strategist as well. So, for example, you would want somebody from one of the major consulting firms who previously had run stuff. Yeah, that about gets it. I presented a shortlist which was comprised precisely of that. And then I said, There's somebody else I want you to have a look at who doesn't meet your criteria, who I think is an even better fit than what it was you asked for. That person got the job. 5 years later, that person was, I think it was 5 or 6 years later, that person was the CEO of FTSE 10 business. And when that person came into my room, I just knew that there was something special. First class degree at Oxford, top of the class Harvard, and had been influenced, not mentored in its sense that I now use in the execution of my business, been mentored by some of the most famous people in commerce in the United Kingdom. And therefore, the whole development of this person was special.
I think this is where the nuance of where the human intelligence cannot be overridden by artificial intelligence, right? These kind of qualities that you speak of, where you're able to detect someone when they walk into a room, AI would not perhaps be able to do it. Uh, my question was coming more to see if it is possible to crack and train AI to be able to do what you're doing. Or, yeah,
I'm
I'm just
smiling
curious
because
about that because I feel uh, the moment we are able to unpack more of our innate strengths and way of doing things, the more we are able to unpack it, the more we are able to decipher the steps we took to arrive at that decision, we will be able to train other people or train AI or train our prodigies or someone who has to take over once we leave the business. It might not be specific steps, but as Ray Dalio says, principles that are there which can guide someone to make those kind of informed decisions. So that's where the question is really coming from.
I smile when you ask the question because my real answer is I don't want that to happen. I simply don't want it to happen.
Yeah,
Because on the one hand, the human values in life,
yeah.
probably the most important things in life itself. And to that extent, why would you try and artificially create them? I'm not convinced, but then, although I chair a technology business, I therefore could be shot down by my own colleagues. I'm not sure the destiny of AI is to understand behavior. I wrote an article recently, you may have read it, which was challenging. No, it wasn't. It was attacking the whole idea that artificial intelligence would play an important role in recruitment. It shouldn't. It can do a preliminary sieve, right, from people who've applied for a job, which typifies the recruitment process at the lower levels of in business, lower levels of management, if you like. So let's dismiss politely the people who don't meet the spec. It can do that. But what it must not do is homogenize CVs to the point where we can't see the personality. So we've now got the crazy situation, truly crazy, where executive search firms, and I was privileged to be CEO of one of the all-time biggest, I ran what, 40 odd offices in, no, 60 offices in 40 odd countries.
Boyden.
And to that extent, choices about appointments are made based upon behavior, not experience. Why? Because you shouldn't be interviewing anybody that hasn't got the experience you're looking for. And therefore, to all intents and purposes, the choice for leaders comes down not to the hard aspects of background, because if the recruitment specification said, I want you to have done this, 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 and this, the shortlist should comprise people who have done this, 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 and this. I'm therefore going to choose the green one because I like the way the green one behaved, not the blue, the black, or the orange. That's what recruitment is truly all about, AI can't touch that. Why? Because AI is no more than the collective genius of everything that's been said about something. But it's never addressed the nuances of personality, of character, of insight. It's all about achievements, and achievements are not enough. You know, the highest compliment that can be paid to an executive search consultant is where the client comes back and says, "Hey, Garner, you are really awful. How do I choose between these people? Because I like all of them." That, right? That is what AI would do, because they're all the same. But I then say to my client, choose the one you like best. Because that's going to give rise to chemical fit between you and them that is going to be the currency in which you deal as you go forward. Hey, what do you think? I think this, I think that, I think the other. These are the things that make human beings what they are, as opposed to automata or animals. Hey,
so here's my question about, let's spark AI and think of you. I mean, not think, you were the CEO of one of the largest executive search firms, and you had to make sure that your offices across the world was delivering a very high quality of service to their clients. So what systems did you put in place that were unique to your organization, which made sure that deliverables from your team members were at the highest level?
You flatter me, because that will always be unfinished business. You can't do that. I can't have 60 offices in 40 countries where everybody's behaving to the same standard. They're not all dealing at the same levels because of the nature of the marketplaces around them. What you can do when you get together is to demonstrate what I think really matters. And in that context, I was often, I'll give you a story. When having run Boyden for 7 years out of New York, I decided that I would politely turn down the invitation to carry on for another period of time. And instead, I set up my own firm. And during the period of time I was running Boyden, I was a privileged member of the board of the Executive Search Association, during which time I had accumulated the operating manuals of all the leading firms. And I took these into my new office in Mayfair with my colleague who'd been looking after me, who was absolutely stellar, wonderful, when I was running Boyden, English lady in England. And I said to her, tell you what, would you, because we're not as busy on day one as we'll be busy hopefully on day 100, go through this lot and produce our own manual. Just steal from what it is that they think is right. And from time to time, because I was growing the business, I would say to her, hey, Lulu, how are you getting on with producing the Garner manual? And she said, I find that very difficult. I can't be that difficult. Give me the Spencer Stewart manual. Because I commuted over 100 miles every day in and out of London, 100 miles each way. I'll take it on the train and I'll see what Spencer Stewart think is good, because I rate them very highly. I don't think I had an Egon Zender one because they were not a member of the Executive Search Association. Anyway, I opened the Spencer Stewart book and I thought, I don't do any of this. I just don't do any of this. So the answer to your question, therefore, is I didn't produce, when I was in Boyden, a manual. I think what I did was in a sense quite deliberately illustrated in the brochure, because we're talking about the 90s now, the brochure that I produced. And the brochure was a series of faces, that's all, of faces of some of my consultants from around the world. Because it was, do you, Mr. Prospective Client, have faith in this person to deliver the answer to your question? And therefore, the answer to your question is, I didn't want homogeneity.
Yeah.
I wanted integrity. I wanted trust. I wanted a prospective client to trust that we, the longest established search firm in the world, was populated with people that you could trust to deliver what you asked them to do. Which didn't mean we had a homogenized process. Excuse me, don't need that. We need homogenized insight. So it comes back to your AI question. I don't think AI in the human context has got insight. I don't even want it to bother. There are so many wonderful things that AI can do without getting involved with trying to interpret behavior. Therefore, don't go there. Trust your instincts. And you then come back to how important are instincts in leadership. They're fundamental. It's not what knowledge you have, it's how you interpret that, how you are able to communicate that, how you're able to share that with your colleagues, how you're prepared to listen. If you've got the right team around you, right, you're not doing the whole thing yourself.
And if you can't recruit the right team for yourself, you can't do it for other people, right?
It was a fascinating piece of data that was published by Russell Reynolds, the search firm later, one of the big and great firms, which said that according to a recent survey in the United States, 47% of CEOs recruited in 2024, right, had left those jobs 12 months later. It was followed up by details saying 40-odd% of CEOs, right, do not rate the people they've got around them. Excuse me? Isn't that one of the most fundamental tasks? CEOs gather around them a cohort of talent which adds to the resource within the business. Adds to. So I would say, I mean, frankly, I was not bad with numbers. I always wanted a great CFO. I'm not a bad psychologist. I want an even better psychologist looking after HR. Right? I'm a marketing person. Yes, I am. I would want around me a great marketing pro. Because I'm not the genius. You know, I get the numbers right, I get the people right, I get the marketing right, I get the sales right. I have that gearing around me. And therefore, the insight of leadership, the humility in gathering around them people who, and it's often been said, are better than they are, that is what makes special magic.
I want to ask you this question over here, which I have. What's the difference between someone who interviews well? You know, in the interview, they have cracked all the questions. They know how to answer questions. They know how to posture, how to create the right kind of body language. They've done all the prep, being trained by coaches who will tell them, you know, answer questions about your strength and weakness, etc. Like this, like this, like this. You will get the job. But you don't see a person how he would perform under pressure. You cannot see how he performed in the past under pressure. You cannot see how he will perform in the
Oh,
future
yes,
under pressure.
you do. Oh, yes, you do.
How?
But the pressure you apply in the interview is not by asking a penetrating question. It's by creating space. It's allowing them to interview themselves. That's pressure. That reveals so much more than a penetrating question.
How does the interviewee interview themselves in an interview?
How do you do that? I'll give you an illustration, and it's a very simple one, and it's often associated with an opening gambit, right? Tell me about yourself. A very high percentage of people, when asked that question, would then give a War and Peace answer, the wrong answer.
Okay.
Right answer is, I wouldn't be here if you didn't know an awful lot about me already. What aspect of what you know about me would you like me to explore? I've got in my room somebody who's got it, somebody who gets it. That's a pressure question. It doesn't feel like it, but that's a pressure question. They understand the process. This is not about having pre-prepared answers or postures towards a question. So I would throw away a question. Tell me about yourself. 90-odd%, that's not statistically robust, 90-odd% would say, well, I was born over here, I did this, I did that. But I think what you really want to know is about my achievements. I don't want to know about your achievements. I want you to tell me by your behavior, by your response, whether you understand the situation you are in now, today. And if you say, tell me, as I've just rehearsed with you, tell me about yourself, and you come back to me immediately and say, what aspect of what you know about me or don't know about me would you like me to explore? I haven't asked the question, tell me your life story. And therefore, most people who get that question fail at moment one in an interview.
So you're looking for assertive behavior to be demonstrated in a conversation that is happening in that moment and not something that can happen in the future. Yeah.
Exactly. Given that, the only reason I would be interviewing somebody for a role is because I've got a prescribed specification to which they must match.
Yeah.
Okay. Therefore, I'm looking for who gets it. Who has got that insight? A word I've used too often in this time we spent together. Who's got the insight which will show me that they understand how things work? The whole process and infrastructure that's out there in the world, teaching people how to interview, is a complete waste of time. Complete and utter waste of time. Because you're treating people as if they were robots. You're interviewing them as if you were a robot, and you're learning nothing. Because if I said to you, what's your weakness? You're going to think, I'm going to carefully maneuver my way around that. It could be your weakness is that you just don't get it, as I've just illustrated. You follow me?
Yeah.
Not, well, I made a mistake once, but I've learned from that. So much of what is transacted in the getting to know people is irrelevant. What one is looking for is that je ne sais quoi, as they say in France, that something special, that spark, that, get ready for this, vital, vital, vital. How do they promote their difference? That's what you're looking for. If I'm looking for people who've been the CFO of a company turning over $250 million, but I'm recruiting for somebody that's got to be a CFO of $1 billion, right? All the people I'm interviewing are roughly the same.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the difference, not the same.
What makes them stand out? I have a question from someone whose name is Javed Khan, and his question is this, and what he does is very interesting. I'm going to come to that as well. I'll just give you the context first the question that he's asking. In your decades of placing top leaders, what single trait or signal consistently separated the truly transformative leaders from merely competent ones? And how can we as recruiters better uncover and assess that in our hiring today? I'll give you a little bit of context about Javed also, because I know him. He's a good friend of mine. He's also going to be the next guest on the show. He has a company which is called Tidy Hire, which actually hires people on mass levels. So they can do up to 500, 1000 interviews using AI, right? They use it for companies that want to do mass hirings for lower positions, I guess, not for senior positions, and they use that as a filter. uh, he's been a recruiter with multiple organizations like IBM, KPMG, etc. And this is where his question is coming from right now. uh, so
I think there is a fault line in the question.
okay.
Because if you are recruiting en masse, how are you going to define transformative, and by what metrics are you going to measure it? Transformation has become a cliche of our time. Most transformation activities are not that. They're organic changes. Transformation is going from here to there, right? It's the ambition of many, but it ends up actually being organically changed.
So I'm going to guess he's asking transformative leaders, because Tidy Hire, the company that he has, is not probably for mass hiring. I mean, is not for transformative leaders. It's for hiring managers or people at a lower level, perhaps. Uh,
That's
so
how I interpreted Javid's question. And I'm saying he's posing a question to which the answer is very difficult.
hmm,
I'm not sure you would see easily, and certainly not through AI, transformative characteristics other than by looking at the difference between the people you're looking at. So you're not looking for achievement, you're looking for their interpretation of how they faced a given situation, given at lower level. Most of what they're doing is not seismic. It's not changing it from here to there. We're not talking about SpaceX here. We're talking about volume recruits. So I would, looking for transformation qualities, I would look at going back into school and education, I would, to see what roles they played prior to business and how they then interpreted their early years in their ingestion within commerce. How they did that. How imaginative were they? How, what's the word? There's a special word here. How challenging were they of the environments into which they had been recruited? What behaviors were they exhibiting in saying to their bosses, who were still only at the intermediate level, hey boss, I had a good idea. What do you think? Where's the evidence of that? Or hey boss, I think what you're suggesting here will not work because. Those are the kind of challenging behaviors I would be looking for in potentially transformative people. Disruptors is the word I was looking for.
hmm.
I'm looking for a certain element of disruptive behavior. I don't want a pain in the neck. I don't want those people who always think they've got a better idea than the boss. I'm looking for examples where what we today would describe as disruption proved to be constructive, helpful, and brought about change.
uh,
Are you looking at me like that because you disagree, or are you looking at me like that because you're looking at something on the
No,
screen?
because I want to unpack so much of that. And then I was looking at the time and I was like, I have something else that I want to touch upon, which is something that we spoke about just we started this whole conversation. While you were speaking about and answering Javed's question, okay, let me touch upon what I was thinking about before. So my eyes went there and there. You noticed that, right? It is about thinking recruiters have to be people who have such high level of self-awareness. They must be people who have done so much of deep work on themselves to be able to understand and unpack these small signals that they have to figure out in uh, people, and to be able to pick on these nuances of behaviors that is happening in the interview. and to challenge that and to identify the disruptors, as you call it.
Allow me to give you an illustration of something that pivotal in my life, and I think is of some significance. One of the pieces of advice that I always gave to candidates who were successful candidates in the searches I was conducting was, when you arrive, your job is not to prove that your new employer made the good decision.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what most people would do. They would actually arrive on the scene early on the first morning, ready to go. I'll prove that they made the right decision. Wrong. They didn't hire that person. They hired the person that they thought, given their background, could hit the deck running, didn't have to prove anything. Would you just please do what I expected you to do when I hired you?
Yeah.
And that is where the corruption of behavior that we're seeing in business begins. I must prove that I was a good hire. No, would you please do what I expect you to do, which is why I hired you? These are not just words. There's a world of difference between them.
I think that mindset is setting because of the term probation, right? Because they feel we are going to evaluate you for the first 3 months. So they're like, we have to prove ourselves to stay relevant over here. And if that
Okay,
did not
wrong.
exist,
Probation is not there to test you. Probation is there to get rid of you if I've made a bad hire. Not the same thing.
hmm,
Most people pass probation, but the more you try and prove that you've justified everything that they hoped in you, the more likely you are to fail, because you're going to be hiding the qualities for which, right?
yeah,
They hired you. You're going to be hiding them in your strife to prove that you're good enough. And that strife then, particularly in a leadership context, manifests itself through the organization over which you've been given a management and a leadership role.
I have a question. What was your worst hiring mistake you made
What
in
was
your
my
life?
first?
The worst hiring mistake, I mean, you place someone, you could be early in your life, it could be early in your journey or any time where you saw potential, but that person did not live up to that position or
I have a clear nominee for that.
okay.
Somebody who proved to be, no, somebody who proved to be an alcoholic.
Hmm.
And the reference checking that I'd done on this individual had not revealed that. But this person was innately
Hmm.
alcoholic. I didn't know. And it was revealed tragically by the pressure that the employer had exhibited on this individual. Not the actual pressure, but the perceived pressure by the nature of the work that needed to be done.
Hmm.
I think that's the only standout one. I'm very proud of the fact that not many of the people that I've ever been responsible, bearing in mind that I don't place them.
Hmm.
I present a shortlist from which a client chooses. Therefore, I'm not
Hmm.
the hirer.
Yeah.
Executive search is not the hirer.
Okay.
But there are most of the people that I have been responsible for them being chosen have ended up being a mega success in one form or another. I think if I have a legacy anywhere, it would be in that. I was with recently one of my most famous people who was hired. I don't want to give way to any identity. And he said, "Hey, Garner, you've no idea the impact that you made upon the executive search market when you set up your own firm in London." And he's dead right. I hadn't got the faintest idea that I had that kind of impact, if you follow me.
I have a question from Anirudh for you. He says, do you believe that CEO jobs are getting shorter and shorter in tenure in recent times?
I don't believe it. It's a fact.
Hmm.
And if you go back to the 47% Russell Reynolds quotation, there's been some pretty poor hiring there. If nearly 50% of the people who were hired ended up leaving inside 12 months, excuse me, that spells out for you in capital letters, poor hiring. They weren't good enough to do the blooming job. So are they getting shorter in tenure in recent times? They may well be. Is it because of the pressure that they're under? The tabloid answer to that question would be yes, they're under huge pressure. Many of them are under huge pressure because they can't handle the job. Particularly in publicly quoted companies, where you have quarterly reporting. In the US, it's 6 monthly, but quarterly reporting on the LSE in London and so on. There are huge pressures upon them. But, and it's a very important but, it has been, and I think this is a disease or an infection that came from the United States. Workaholism as a concept is poisoning the well. Is poisoning the well. If CEOs had around them people who would share the load, I'll illustrate this vividly in a minute, right? It wouldn't be quite as pressured. Let me paint to you a picture of what we read every week in broadsheet press about a week in the life of a CEO. I awake at 5 o'clock. I do some calisthenics. I have a cup of coffee. I have a quick look at my emails. I get to the office at 7:30. I look at my emails again and handle those. I'm then in meetings all day. I'm out at dinner 3 times a week, and I travel internationally. What? What the hell do you think you're doing, sunshine? And I now draw a picture. Captain of the ship, engine room. Is that description illustrating captain of the ship? I don't think so. It's illustrating engine room, which means they haven't got the talent around them to do that job. Why isn't your personal assistant handling key elements of your emails? Why isn't your head of corporate communications handling what they're doing? Why isn't your chief scientist doing what they're doing? Why are you involved in all this detail? If CEOs are going to navigate their business, they have to look out of the window, as I'm doing now. Look out of the main window. Stop looking at the screen. This is toxic. But the media, from which we all feed in whatever form it is, are saying this is vital. This is vital. I have this by my bedside. Right? I spend time with my family on Saturday, but I'm starting to think about work Sunday lunchtime. Oh, get real. Get real. That's not what life is all about. And you're setting the wrong role model for all of the people around you. But it's being put up there as that's the way it's done. And it's not the way it's done. Warren Buffett, one of the most successful business people of all time, it's not the life that he led. Elon Musk, for whom on the one hand I have huge admiration, on the other I don't, and it's the behaviors that I don't like, not the lack of achievement on the other. He's not down there testing the chemicals of the fuel that the rockets are going up with. He's not road testing every Tesla. But if you look at the profiles of chief executives that are now being portrayed as being role models, that's what they're doing, and it's not helpful.
Those are people who are being managers and not leaders, right? They're just being into the...
Correct. It's a wonderful distinction. Thank you for bringing that up.
I want to bring... So I've created a phrase out of what you said before we started off the interview. And I think it's a beautiful way to look at look at how leaders should be, and it's driving our conversation, the last bit that you just spoke about. And I'm going to bring up this image to just uh, talk about, right? And I look at this image of you in a Formula racing, and you spoke about how you're reading books on airplanes, and you spoke about this phrase or metaphor or of clean the whiteboard. And I loved it. And I think it's something that leaders should be doing more and more of, cleaning their whiteboards. Could you unpack this for our audience, what cleaning the whiteboard metaphor is about, and how it would help them become better leaders as a result of doing that?
Thank you. I can. I've written articles which have appeared on LinkedIn and stuff like that. I've done speeches where it said, stop looking at the screen and look out of the window. Right? A leader is there to think, not to do. The do bits are done by the people you have around you. And therefore, I use this whiteboard thing in terms of going to bed. You were kind enough to ask me what I'm currently reading, and I said, I read every day a chapter or two from what you would call an airplane ride book. Some of the ones I've got up here. And that is to clean the whiteboard. It's to say, I'm not thinking about the company that I chair, which is a technology company, which is fabulous. It's going through a funding cycle right now, which is scary, right? My mentoring business, and so on and so forth. Clean the whiteboard. Read about fantasy. It's got human beings in it, so on and so on. Clean the whiteboard. The racing car. I was brought up in a family where my father would like to have raced a motor car, but we simply couldn't afford it. He therefore became an official, and from a very early age, he took me with him. I was the eldest of three. Took me with him where he was an official at a racetrack. I therefore had in my mind's eye, I would like to race motor cars. I decided that I wouldn't do that until I could afford it, which meant there was no question of a professional career. In any event, I was fascinated by business even more than I was about motor racing. But my motor racing was whiteboard. You can't go out there wondering about the debits and credits, the people, the balance sheet, the customers, cash flow. When you're driving a Formula One car, you can't do that, particularly the era of Formula One cars that I drove, which were those of the 50s, which were of my childhood. You couldn't do that. In which case, the therapeutic value of my motor racing, and just in my case, it was motor racing. In other cases, it would be different things. The therapy opposed to looking out of the window of life rather than the doing stuff, fundamentally crucial. Was I a better executive because I was motor racing? Yes. Yes, no question. Because I was looking, when I woke up the following morning, it was an interesting story. I was at a world famous event competing, and I was in the special drivers competitors dining area. And one of the world's leading motor racing journalists came up and he said, "Hey, Andrew, aren't we privileged here?" And he then pointed to the room. And there were world champions, some of whom I knew personally. People like Jackie Stewart and Sterling Moss. And I turned around with total but spontaneous sincerity and said, "Yeah, but we're the lucky ones." Why is that? Because tomorrow I'll be in my office. They're living with their memories. I'm looking for tomorrow. They're dining out on yesterday. And therefore that whiteboard, which I use metaphorically for going to sleep at night, right? Motor racing played a very important role in that regard for me, as indeed has my involvement with my board membership at business school, my board membership at the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. These are all whiteboard experiences.
We have one question from Serge, who introduced us to each other, right? He's asking, can you share an exciting, fun story related to racing that leaders can relate to or learn from?
I don't know. Typical of you, Bakazi, that you would come up with something like that. A fun story. Oh, that's a very difficult question. Typical of you, Bakazi, to do that. Yeah, I guess. Through a fellow competitor, I became aware of something that I knew by headline and as an outsider looking in. That the venue Silverstone, at which we just had a British Grand Prix, right, was owned by and remains owned by a club. But they got not only a racetrack, but 750 acres of land that they owned outside of the racetrack. But the management of the business of running the track and the potential estate was in the hands of largely retired racing drivers, most of whom wouldn't know what a balance sheet looked like, because that's not what they were. And I had the amazing good fortune, so I'm not sure this answers your question, the amazing good fortune, therefore, to be invited to pitch to do a consulting project on the separation or the potential separation of the club from the asset. I won the pitch, and I then found myself, get ready for this, and this is the funny bit, I found myself reporting to Jackie Stewart, 3 times world champion, who was the president of the club, who then proceeded to arm wrestle me all the time in terms of what I was, my report, as to the way he wanted the report to be written. That was fun, because that told me what Jackie was all about. Jackie was a winner. He was always right. He wanted things done his way. And are they some of the qualities you need to be as good as he was? And the answer is yes. And therefore, metaphorically, that segues into, blends into the behaviors we see of certain leaders. They're made of the same stuff. It has to be done their way. And whilst they're winning, they're terrific. When they stop winning, they've got nowhere to go. Because there's no separate, almost IP from that. I watched a documentary, funnily enough, on Jackie Stewart, who I know personally. I've been a house guest. He and his wife, and my wife and I, we dined together, not least at his house and stuff. He described himself as dreadfully selfish. If you watch the documentary, he's blooming right. Hugely selfish. Sterling Moss, the same. These are people of my era, 2 generations, because Moss preceded Stewart. And therefore, if you look, therefore, at leaders around here, how about Steve Jobs? Much disliked, totally selfish. Musk, totally selfish, self-centered. I know self-centered and selfish are not the same thing. It's all about them, what they want. And they would grab the wheel, right? And it would be done their way. Jackie didn't win that one. APP did. So we've now got a fabulous infrastructural estate around the Silverstone race circuit. I can't be credited with that because I didn't do it, but I created the foundation stone from which it has happened. We've got a university there. Many of the race teams are based there. There is now income coming into the circuit that's got nothing to do with motor racing at all, except it's coming in from the infrastructure of motoring. I don't know whether that answers Serb's question, but it was a neat way for me to
Oh.
a neat way for me to plug.
So it says it does answer the question. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Coach.
So,
The money will be on your desk tomorrow.
so I know we have a hard stop in within the next 5 minutes or before the next 5 minutes. So I'm going to share a few things that the audience has mentioned over here, not to reflect on it, but just to show what they have been saying. But also, I have one last question, which perhaps I will ask you before I start showing it, or maybe I'll just show these. Um, Anirudh says, "Great to hear the story, Andrew. Trust and integrity are the core of any business." Uh, Nadeem mentioned, "This is just great. There's a LinkedIn user, I don't know what the name is, interviewers who create space, and I love the interview to answer the questions that reveals so much." And Nadeem also mentioned about workaholic thing is poisoning the world. Indeed.
Absolutely, Nadeem.
Uh, yes. One last question to wrap this is, if you could teach just one thing, if you could teach just one thing to the future generation of leaders, what would you choose to say?
There's more than one answer to that.
And that'll be the next podcast. We can do that again. But today,
Be authentic. Be confident enough in your authenticity.
how does one know one is being authentic? What is a measure for them to identify they're being authentic?
I'm saying this is a discussion you're having with yourself.
Hmm.
Is that what I really feel? Is that what I really mean?
Okay.
Because if you've got a bunch of intelligent people around you, they'll know that you're not being authentic. Be yourself. Be yourself. I'm seeing now all confusion out there. People now don't know how to dress because the formality of dress has been taken away, in which case you've got confusion. If this person doesn't look like a boss, a leader, you ask the question whether they actually are. Where you've now got people who of late middle age and seniority who are behaving as if they were 30 years younger and hip and up with it, that's not authentic. All right?
Yeah.
I choose to badge my authenticity. Get ready for this. A long time ago.
Red color socks.
I wear red socks,
Nice.
right? I also wear red underpants, but you're not supposed to know that. And they are an aide memoir to me, who I am. People would say to me early on in my managerial career, Andrew, you can't drive a Porsche. I bloody well drive in a Porsche. That's who I am. Don't say that potential clients won't like that. In my entire life, nobody ever said, who do you think you are turning up here in a Porsche? I bet you're going to charge me a lot of money. Nobody ever asked me that question.
Yeah.
But the focus was that they would. Do I need red socks? No, they're an aide memoir. They're to tell me that I have got to be authentic to myself. Because if I'm authentic to myself, the audience, potential customers, colleagues, advisors, right, they will be able to test my authenticity. And what am I asking them to do? I'm asking them to follow me. I'm asking them to invest in me. I'm asking them to trust my judgment. If all of that's manufactured, contrived, the perceptive people with whom I want to spend my life won't believe it and won't do any of those things. They won't follow, they won't invest.
Brilliant. I would just summarize what you just said. when you start being authentic, you will attract the right kind of people in your life.
You
Uh,
will.
and you'll push away everyone who is not resonating with you and your message and who you are.
Yeah.
Life will be much more easier.
It does, because you then have an automatic gearing around you.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
have people who are not saying, hey, hang on a minute, do I trust him, or should I trust him? Does that make sense? I can say to him, that's a pile of rubbish. We shouldn't be doing that. And he will listen. Right? We have these lionized leaders who are almost impenetrable until circumstance finds that they're not good enough. Well, at 100 years of age, I am now, you wouldn't have got this far if that had happened. Being totally autobiographical. If people still trust in me today, it's because they've trusted me in the past. Have
Yeah.
I got followership? Yes. It's because they believe me.
Yeah.
And if you don't believe in your leader, right, the leader isn't a leader. On which note,
Not exactly. I don't want to take another minute. I've already taken an extra minute from you because you have another appointment, I know.
so my
So
next appointment has said, put it off. I'm enjoying this so much. Put it off until 13:10.
thank you so much. It's been a lovely conversation that we have had. Thank you so much for your generosity, for sharing your lessons in life with us, and look forward to learning more and helping those around us. Thank you so much,
I look
Andrew.
forward to the possibility of doing some more, but I leave that entirely to you. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Enjoy your day. Bye bye.
You too.